Okay, so Vikings. I think we all have this image in our heads, right? Like horns on helmets, big and burly guys swinging axes.
Yeah, like a Hollywood Viking.
Right, that classic fearsome raider. But one of our listeners sent in some really fascinating stuff on Vikings, and it turns out there's so much more to them. So today, we're diving deep into the real deal. Were they just these crazy pirates, or were they more than that? Maybe savvy traders, or I don't know, something even more complex.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. The fascinating thing is they really were all of those things, plus even more. Their history is just a blend of contradictions, and that's what makes it so interesting to dive into.
All right, so let's start with that classic image, the one that really gave them that fearsome rep. The raid on Lindisfarne Monastery back in 793 A.D. That's got to be like the textbook Viking moment.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, picture it, right? This peaceful monastery on a remote island. Out of nowhere, you see these long ships, like literally emerging from the mist. Vikings, armed to the teeth, just descending on Lindisfarne. They seize treasures, leave a trail of, chaos. It was a huge shock. It sent ripples throughout Europe. Really, it's considered like the starting bell of the Viking Age.
Yeah, okay. I can see why that kind of thing would solidify a pretty brutal reputation. But, you're saying there's more to these raids, right? Like there were deeper reasons behind them.
Exactly. Raiding, you see, wasn't just about, well, violence and grabbing loot. For Vikings, it was a way to prove bravery. It was a path to wealth and status within their world. I mean, think about their home in Scandinavia, right? Harsh environment, resources are scarce. So raiding, that's a way to get what you need, and it boosts your standing in the community.
So it's like cultural factors combined with just needing stuff to survive.
Mm-hmm.
But weren't some raids just, hitting wherever they could, just taking advantage of a situation?
Oh, for sure. There was definitely some opportunism there. But don't underestimate the Vikings. They were strategic, too. They carefully picked out wealthy targets, monasteries, coastal settlements, places that didn't have strong defenses. And their ships, especially the longship, it had this shallow draft, so they could zip up rivers along coastlines, appear out of nowhere, attack fast, and then, poof, vanish before anyone could really fight back.
And it wasn't just Lindisfarne. They hit all over, right? I mean, centuries of raids across Europe, England, France, Ireland,
Well,
even parts of the Mediterranean. And that kind of leads us to the Great Viking Army. That invaded England in 865 A.D. This wasn't just like hit and run anymore. This was about conquering and settling down.
right. The Great Viking Army was a major turning point.
Yeah, it signaled a big change. It wasn't just about quick raids anymore. Now it was a full-on campaign. They wanted to conquer. They wanted to settle down. This is where we start seeing Vikings not just as these raiders, but also as, settlers, putting down roots. That's wild, though, right? I mean, going from this fearsome raider to a peaceful settler. What happened there?
It's pretty amazing, actually. As they started getting a foothold in new places, they realized that settling down had its perks. Like in England, they set up these winter camps, and over time, they became permanent settlements. Vikings were adaptable, they were pragmatic, they were always figuring out how to thrive.
And so that led to, the Danelaw,
Yeah.
that part of England that was basically Viking territory.
Exactly. By the late 9th century, they had a huge chunk of England under their control through battles and through negotiating, too. And there's this treaty, the Treaty of Wedmore, in 878 A.D. It was between Alfred the Great and Guthrum, the Viking leader. That treaty officially acknowledged the Danelaw. It's pretty fascinating how the Anglo-Saxon and Viking cultures actually coexisted, and they even, blended in some places.
Yeah, and that's still visible even today, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Viking influence is everywhere in England. Place names, language, some traditions even.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it went beyond England, too. They set up shop in Ireland, Scotland, even Normandy, which, either way, that name comes from Norsemen, and parts of Russia, Iceland. They got around.
But here's where things get even more interesting. Our sources, they actually reveal that these guys weren't just raiders and settlers. They were crazy good traders and explorers. They had these trade routes that spanned, practically the whole globe, didn't they?
That's right. Try to imagine this. Vikings sailing east from Scandinavia all the way to the Caspian Sea and even as far as Baghdad, then south down to Constantinople, even Jerusalem, and then west across the Atlantic all the way to North America. This wasn't just about plunder. They were exchanging goods and ideas over these huge distances.
Okay, so what were they trading? I'm guessing more than just like furs and timber, right?
Those were definitely staples. But the variety of good, it's mind-blowing. They had wheat, wool, fish, silver, but also, luxury stuff, Spices, wine, jewelry, silk, glass. They even had walrus ivory from Greenland, which is pretty crazy. It just shows you how far their trade network reached. And it wasn't simple barter either. This was complex, sophisticated trading. They needed to be good at shipbuilding, navigation, economics even.
So that really flips the script on that brute warrior thing, huh? Seems like trading was a pretty big deal for them.
Absolutely. Trade brought wealth back to Scandinavia, new technologies too. And, it exposed the Vikings to all these different cultures, different ways of thinking. So it probably played a big part in why they eventually moved away from raiding as their main way of making a living.
So for our listener who sent us on this Viking deep dive, what would you say is the biggest takeaway?
I'd say remember that Vikings were way more than just those bloodthirsty raiders we see in the movies. They were explorers, they were settlers, they were traders, and they left a huge mark on the world. So we have to look past those simple stereotypes and see them for what they were, a complex, dynamic society.
Well said. And before we go, I'll leave everyone with one last thought. If these guys were so good at sailing, at exploration, what happened? How did they fall from power? What made such a powerful force just fade away? That's something to think about, maybe do some more digging into. It's a fascinating part of history.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Vikings, man, way more than meets the eye.